Today we're going to go over the differences of the P365 Gen 1, Gen 2. Not sure why people are calling them that, but I think it's more of a production change is what's going on. Not really that they're making different generations. It's just they're finding ways to make it more economical for them to manufacture and sell to make, better profit margins. Also, I think they're doing a little trial and error, see what works and what doesn't work. And that's a shame that they're actually using the consumer as their guinea pigs, but that's where we're at right now. So let's dive in. Start off at the firing pins. Right hand side is Gen 1, left hand side is going to be Gen 2. First thing off the bat I notice is there's a lot more coils in the Gen 1 than they have on the Gen 2. Let's go ahead and take that apart. Clearly see the Gen 1 spring is a lot longer than the Gen 2 spring. Several more coils. The thickness of the spring is about the same, but you can see they had a lot more spring tension on the first generation firing pin spring compared to the Gen 2. Now if you want to know how to take the slide apart and take the firing pin, I'm not going to go over it in this video, but I do have previous other videos showing you how to take that apart. This is just going to show you the difference between a Gen 1 and a Gen 2. So Gen 1, much longer spring. Gen 2, a lot shorter, less coils. The firing pins look very similar. I don't see a huge difference between these. The only difference is the Gen 1's a little shinier. The Gen 2 is more of a matte finish. I'm not sure if that has to do with the hardening process or the MIM mold or the casting, but it just it's a little shinier. Maybe that makes it a little smoother shooting, more refined than the matte finish. Maybe that's one of the parts that they might have cut cost on. Just bead blasting this instead of polishing it up, making it real smooth. If you feel the two surfaces, the Gen 1 is definitely much smoother than the Gen 2. So maybe that makes it slide inside the slide easier. I'm not sure. Just showing you the differences that I can see. Safety plungers pretty much look identical. Don't see any differences or any improvements or any shortcuts made there. They pretty much mirror each other. Same type of finish. Nothing different there. Pin safety plunger. This is the Gen 1. It's a shorter, fatter spring, where the Gen 2 has a skinnier, taller spring. The only benefit I can see to this with the taller, skinnier spring would that it would make the trigger pull a little easier than this shorter, thicker, coiled spring. Maybe they were trying to make the trigger nicer, which I find on Gen 1s they're pretty nice to begin with. Onto the slides. Don't see much improvement here. The machining process looks about the same. The same spots are polished or blued. Now on the Gen 1s they did have a different sight. These sights have been upgraded on the Gen 1 that we have here. They used to just be green dot glow in the dark night sights. Now the new ones have this green dot on the front, which we changed them out. Sig Sauer sent us these new ones because the original night sights that came on Gen 1 stopped glowing. So we changed those out to the new and improved sights, which are the Gen 2 sights. So slight upgrade there. Now I did notice I'm not going to take this apart. If you want to go take it apart in a, I got a video on how to take the extractor out, but you just knock this pin out right here. The spring is larger on the Gen 1 with the little buffer in there for the extractor. The Gen 2 is a much smaller spring on the extractor. Not sure why they changed that. I didn't hear of anyone having any extractor issues, but apparently they made it a little smaller on the Gen 2 compared to the Gen 1, which has a much beefier extractor spring. Looking at the barrels, as you can see, our Gen 1, we have shot this one a lot. We're probably right under 2,000 rounds on that one. It looks like the engraving on the barrels are different. I'm not really seeing any machining differences. Everything looks pretty uniform and mirrors each other. I would say probably the only major difference that I see is the engraving, and I don't believe that's going to cause any function issues. So you can clearly see the Sig Sauer is at the very top and the 9mm 19s at the very bottom on the Gen 2. Gen 1, you can see Sig Sauer is slightly lower and the 9mm by 19 is directly below it. So that's a good indication to show the difference between the two barrels. If you did see one at your local gun shop, you can see just by the engraving, Gen 1, Gen 2. Coil springs, don't see anything different there. No changes there, everything looks about the same. I have the trigger assemblies out now. I really don't see much of a difference. The Gen 2 sear is definitely a lot shinier. Looks like it's been polished, where the Gen 1 is much more of a matte color. Springs look the same. I don't see anything different there. The machining process on this pen here looks very crude compared to the Gen 1, which looks nicely fitted. I don't think that would cause any function issues, but it's just a little bit crudely made compared to the Gen 1. Trigger pull about the same. Gen 1 seems a little lighter, but I think that might have to do with the amount of rounds that have been put through this gun. It just might be a little bit lighter. I wouldn't give the edge to it due to mechanics. I'll just give it to it's just more broken in compared to the Gen 1. Another difference that I do see that it is different. I don't think this would help with any type of reliability issues, but the takedown pin for the chassis, the Gen 2 is tapered on both ends compared to the Gen 1, which was just a round pin. There is a slight taper, but not as drastic as they're shown on this Gen 2 one. I kind of prefer the Gen 1 over the Gen 2. Maybe they made this more advanced taper to make it easier to put in or take out if you're changing out your frames on your chassis. I'm not sure if this is a reference to a Gen 1 and a Gen 2, but there's a number in the front of the chassis. I mean, not the chassis, the frame, the grip frame. If you look at the very front, underneath where the recoil spring would go, this one says 1 and this one says 2. I don't know if that means Gen 1 or Gen 2, or if it means something else for the production run. Looking at the chassis frames, I don't see any differences. They pretty much mirror each other. Not a huge difference, but I am quite curious about this 1 and 2 up here I wonder if that is an indication from Sig saying that there is Gen 1, Gen 2, and then possibly a Gen 3. Back together now. I would have to say the Gen 1 was easier to put back together, except for the firing pin. The firing pin on the Gen 2 was a whole lot easier to put together, just because that spring is so much shorter. It's not as so much pounds, not so heavy of a weight compared to the Gen 1, which that extra spring tension just makes it a little bit harder to put back together. I think the reason that everything else went back together easy on the Gen 1 was because I've just taken this gun apart so many times that it's just breaking in where it's easier to come apart, put back together. Another major thing that I've noticed just when I pick up a Gen 1 compared to Gen 2 is the trigger. When you actually hear it dry fire, I find the Gen 1 just sounds way more pronounced compared to the Gen 2. It just sounds like a dead trigger. It's just real hollow sound. It doesn't sound too stout. That probably mainly has to do with that firing pin spring, with the Gen 1 being so much more stoutier. That's probably why you hear more of a positive click compared to the Gen 2 where it's not so positive. See, that just sounds like a regular firearm when you dry fire it, compared to the Gen 2 when you dry fire it, it just sounds really dead. It just sounds hollow, like it's hitting something instead of, I don't know, it doesn't sound as, it just doesn't sound normal like other firearms when you dry fire it. Gen 1 sounds pretty normal, I guess you would say. Not sure exactly how to describe it, or if the audio is really picking it up well, but when you hear it in person, there's a noticeable sound difference. Other than that, that's about all I can see the differences. I've only shot the Gen 1, have not shot the Gen 2 yet, but if I get a chance to shoot it, I'll do a follow-up talking the difference in the way that they shoot, and hopefully I can get my hands on a Gen 3 if they do exist. And I'm probably going to look into those chassis on why there's numbers in the front. Maybe that's an indication difference between Gen 1, Gen 2, maybe Gen 3, or just could be a production number, not sure. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. Y'all have a great day.